Let's say you and a few friends are hungry, so you go into a local Chinese restaurant. There are no empty tables, but people are getting up and leaving, a few people already waiting in the lobby. You walk to the host and you ask, how long will it be? They say,
"It'll be 5-10 minutes.
You give them your name. At some point, some 30 minutes later, that 5 to 10 minute wait is clearly out the door.
We've been waiting here. Now, I know we were ahead of that guy. He just came in.
Oh no, Mr. Cohen, always here."
And you're starving for food. Your blood sugar's low, your tummy's hungry, your brain is frustrated. So what do? You wait. Maybe you leave. Maybe you complain.
How much longer is it gonna be?
About 5-10 minutes.
But why? Why do you stand there like a jackass waiting for your turn? Why don't you just walk over to the table of elderly diners and simply take their food?
What are they gonna do?
They won't do anything. In fact, you'll be giving them a story to tell for the rest of their lives.
Have you ever ordered wine at a restaurant? I do this. I'm a wine snob, to the point where I have particular grapes that are grown in particular valleys that I have deluded myself into believing I can taste the unique quality of. When I find a restaurant that has this wine, Jura region, Ploussard grapes, I cannot help but order it. The waiter will bring the bottle and then show it to me. Once to me, then everyone. They offer the cork for a smell. Then I get a sip. I mean, I'm the one who ordered it after all. And then, and only then, do I give permission for him to pour everyone else their glasses. As if I might say, whoa, this is shit. It's awful. Never mind, take it away. I'm actually not really seen that happen. These things that we do, they're codes. These restaurant codes are just one tiny fraction of the invisible rules that govern our lives. They're within how close we stand to others in an elevator, how we know when someone's telling a joke without them saying,
"That's the joke."
And even in who we're allowed to fall in love with. But these codes, they weren't always there. They're not transcendent truths. They were built through millennia of people being around people. How they work and how they were made just changed drastically through time. And now, as we sit at the brink of the end of the world, a feeling we all know all too well these days, we're watching as these codes disappear, possibly forever. So join me as we take a short stroll through an oversimplified version of structural anthropology, and we talk about the codes of society. My story about the Chinese restaurant and the Seinfeld episode I stole the idea from is ultimately a thing I can share because the people watching this and the people who've watched Seinfeld have a shared system of meaning. This happens within social groups over time, and it's not really just about restaurants. When we hear of a tribe where women malform their facial features or men leap from cliffs, these things are not done randomly. These codes grow out of the material realities and shared experiences of those in those social groups, the commonalities in which people find meaning. Now, to go back a bit, in the 1950s, an anthropologist named Claude Levi-Strauss revolutionized how we understand social codes by suggesting something fairly radical. As he said it, all human cultures organize themselves through systems of opposition. Think about food. For Levi-Strauss, he noticed something a little bit fascinating. Across cultures, the distinction between raw and cooked food isn't just about making things tasty or safer to eat. It was about marking a boundary between nature and culture. Think about it. Raw meat is natural, dangerous, wild. Cooking transforms it into something civilized, cultured, safe. When we say that someone has a refined palate, we're unconsciously playing into this ancient code, separating cultured from uncultured. But it goes deeper than just food. For Levi-Strauss, he showed how these oppositions structured everything, especially kinship systems. Who can marry who lives with what family after marriage. These aren't just random rules. They formed intricate systems where each element got its meaning from apparently binary opposition to an alternative, kind of like language where up only means something if we already have down, that kind of thing. Take his analysis of food preparation rules. In many societies, certain foods have to be boiled, but others must be roasted, some not cooked at all. What's the difference? Well, for Levi-Strauss, he showed these weren't just cooking preferences, they're ways of organizing an entire social world. Boiling food, for example, might be associated with women who cook inside of homes. Well, roasting is men's work done in the open. Just want a grill, all of that shit. So each method carries a whole code of gender, space, and social status. But there's a problem with this theory. No one saw it more closely than one of his students, Maurice Godelier, who would take these ideas to the gritty reality of actual societies and do a materialist analysis. So let's zoom in on a specific thing: salt. Levi-Strauss might have seen salt as a binary code. It preserves versus decays, pure versus impure, that kind of thing. It's a neat symbolic system. But no, when Godelier studied the salt production among the Baruya of New Guinea, he found something far more complicated. The Baruya made salt by burning specific plants and extracting minerals from that ash. Simple enough, but here's where Levi-Strauss's theory cracks a bit. The men didn't control salt production because of a pre-existing symbolic code of the purity or gender is requiring to burn certain things or certain plants. No. They controlled it because salt was valuable for trade. The economic reality kind of came first. The code formed around it. Think of it step by step. Someone burns this plant, gets ash from it, and when added to food, it does some really good shit. They develop a real specific practice, burning plants and using those ingredients on other raw things. Salt. This salt then becomes valuable in regional trade networks as it can be made. The plant isn't, for example, infinite. And men who control trade would control production. Only then did salt making become coded as male knowledge in this tribe. And only after that did it get wrapped in the layers of symbolic meaning about male power. This right here is Godelier's crucial insight. Social codes aren't just inherited templates that float above society. They're constantly being reproduced through actual life practice and are produced within the constraints of a material world. People don't follow codes just because they exist. They reproduce them because they serve real social functions. And when those functions change, the codes can transform or collapse entirely. The Baruya, they didn't start with a code about male power and then decide men must make salt. They started making salt. Men took control of the valuable resource because they had power, and they built codes to justify and maintain that control. Practice came first, meaning followed, imbued a bit with that economic reality. And this pattern where economic and material reality shapes codes, not the other way around, appears everywhere once you start looking. Take another of Godelier's examples from the Baruya. They had these really amazing sacred flutes. They weren't really musical instruments, though. They did that, but they were more powerful ritual objects that women were forbidden to see. Why? Well, it's, again, not because of some timeless code about music for men and gender, but because these flutes were used to coordinate male-controlled labor groups. The sacred prohibition protected male economic power. Better phrasing, maybe. These rules maintained stability. You don't really need to look that far or that ancient or that remote to find this process. Consider the history of the device you're using, computing in America. In the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, computer programming was considered women's work, glorified secretarial labor. The term computer itself originally referred to women who performed calculations. Grace Hopper, Jean Jennings, and dozens of women programmed ENIAC, the first general-purpose electronic computer. But that code flipped. See, initially, hardware was considered the important male domain. You'd buy hardware, that's what the economic power was. You didn't buy software. Software was a thing that you had women do the work for inside of your office. That was clerical work. You'd type. Ugh. Data? Ooh. Sheets of paper? Who wants that? That's for chicks. And as software became more complicated and profitable in the 60s and 70s, men began entering the field in huge numbers. Suddenly, programming was seen as technical, creative work done by leaders in the space. The field developed new barriers to entry, mostly through educational requirements that women had only recently been able to even attempt to overcome. And that new code emerged. Programmers. God. Just like with Berrulia's salt, the gender coding followed money and power, not the other way around. By the 80s, the percentage of women in computer science began plummeting. That same work that was once naturally feminine became masculine. Right around the time, it happened to become more prestigious and be better paid and be a good business move. This is what Godelier means when he talks about codes not just being inherited templates. They're tools that get reshaped as material conditions change. This isn't an easy thing to grasp. What I'm describing is a very cynical academic view of things. The reality of life, for all of us, is that we don't consciously decide these things. We aren't aware of it as it's happening. The process itself is really, really difficult to spot. Marcel Griaule, one of my favorites, he showed us this with something really fascinating amongst the Dogon of Mali. How technical knowledge becomes sacred, how that process itself is hidden, but does create social codes. See, Griaule wrote this amazing study called Men of Fire. It was about the blacksmiths of this tribe, and in the West, we tend to consider blacksmithing a trade we kind of always have, but to the Dogon, no, much more. See, Griaule talked about this complex web of meaning that he was able to find. These aren't just craftsmen working metal. Their technical process was wrapped in layers of cosmological significance, levels of godly significance that we can't even possibly comprehend today. Every strike of a hammer doesn't just shape metal, it reenacts the creation myth the Dogon have. Every tool isn't just an implement, it's a symbol in this massive spiritual system. So, for the Dogon, when the blacksmiths strike metal, they were actually galvanizing the earth and the sky, as was done at the moment of creation. The primordial egg, shattered into pieces, flung to the far corners of the world. The disorder of Ogo and the pale fox made into order itself, reforged as the cosmic order, in the forming of whatever object the blacksmith is making. Even the forge itself had to be placed in line with myths at certain directions and setups and organization, and nothing done was arbitrary or accidental. It's all forming around this mythology. And this is kind of the crucial point. The Dogon blacksmiths, they aren't just preserving ancient codes. As they were doing this, they were actively creating new ones through their practice. Every successful innovation in metalworking would be incorporated into the Dogon mythological system. Technical efficiency with spiritual truth, reinforcing each other. When a new technique would work better, it wasn't just more efficient, it was proof of a deeper cosmic wisdom. And this is where Griaule's insights really back up what Godelier wrote about. Well, economic power shapes codes, technical mastery can sacralize them. The blacksmith's knowledge wasn't powerful because it was sacred. It became sacred because it was powerful. Their technical expertise gave them the authority to interpret and extend the codes they worked within. This process of technical knowledge, becoming sacred knowledge, becoming social power. Well, this brings us to what Deleuze and Guattari would later call despotic overcoding. What happens when these local codes, like the Dogon blacksmith's sacred knowledge or the salt makers' male power, when these encounter something bigger, something that wants to rewrite all codes at once or overwrite them? This is the term they use in Anti-Oedipus called despotic overcoding. Think of ancient Mesopotamia. You have hundreds of local communities, each with their own codes about farming, marriage, worship, walking where you can, what social functions you can go to, codes about how much grain is held and who gets to hold it. You might etch marks in wood or stone, but tribes never really had a written word, not like we use it. Then came the first great empires, and with them, something revolutionary? Writing. Writing isn't really a technology, despite what civilization the video game may have you think. It's more a tool of power. When a king's scribes write, 25% of this goes to the king. They're not really just recording information. They're overcoding all the local customs, the ones about sharing harvests, traditional rights to crops, existing codes about food, obligation, relationships, debts. All of it. This written thing, these words, they're an edict. What they say matters. Do or die, quite literally being the thing that pushes them. And this is despotic overcoding in action. Local codes don't disappear. That's not really how it works. Instead, they're subordinated. Everything gets reinterpreted through the sovereign's code. Old meanings, they'll stick around, archaisms of old, but new meanings overlay them. King's law doesn't erase that village custom. It subsumes it. So you have this weird thing where vast empires co-opt local codes. The Dogon, at their best, maybe sold metalwork to occasionally others. More often, they were simply enslaved and killed by Western and Muslim forces, which raided them and did this often. It's really only in the lifetime of my parents, actually, that the Dogon took on writing. They're very nomadic people. When Griaule lived with them and learned everything I talked about, they were actually exclusively in an oral tradition. That freedom from writing, it's unique. It's a unique reality for people. And there aren't any stories here that aren't really just bleak. Opposition to the Dogon story could be the Inca. Their system of what we would call land ownership is far more tied to kinship systems, as Godelier spoke of them. You didn't have a deed to land so much as a communal understanding of who handled certain parts of land. It didn't matter because the Spanish with their writing showed up and by edict created Spanish settlements for the locals, introduced formal systems of land surveying and properties, and enabled the purchase of titles to said land, and finally the ability to have private individual ownership of land. This didn't take as long as you may think, and that's really all it takes. And why we use the word overcoding can kind of be seen in how this turned out. Because local codes don't die, they instead are written over, overcoded, painted over. Like an artist, unhappy with his first attempt, who covers his canvas in white paint that's just a bit too thin. You still get it through, but it's not quite as strong. A great example would be to go to a Episcopal church sometime that's near a Native American reservation. It will be entirely familiar, yet distinctively native. Overcoding doesn't really want to destroy code. It wants to overwrite it, maintain a stability that's uniform at that meta level. Well, it wants to until something else comes along. You want to guess what it is? Capitalism. Unlike the despot who wants to overcode everything as a form of control and maintenance of that large survival and stability, capitalism functions by decoding, reducing everything to these abstract quantities, pure numbers, and efficiencies. Let's return again to this blacksmith. That Dogon blacksmith exists today. You can find freshly made kind of stunning items, but his reality is very different. Metal has a price index. The time it takes to make anything costs money. There are efficiencies to be found through everything that a blacksmith does. Within capitalism, we don't value the codes at all. We value that efficiency and the marketplace. And a blacksmith totally can be made far more efficient. For example, why have one person who does everything? They get tired. No, have one man do each part, then put them in a line so each one is always doing only their part. After all, if one man can make a dogon door in a day, we can find a way to have 5 men make 10 doors in a day. You might be able to make a machine that can do one part faster, or 3 machines that can do most of this. How many men really need to be involved in sacred works after all? And this is very different. This isn't the despot, the king. This isn't kinship. This is capital. Think about how modern banking decodes money. Traditional societies, they had wealth, they had money. Wealth was deeply coded. Money was too. You might have blood money, or a dowry, or the coin of the king. These didn't really have a universal value the way that we talk about it now. These things existed in trade, in debt, and there were intensely complex social rules about every single part of it. In modern banking, money, that's just numbers. $1 from a wedding gift is the same as the $1 from selling weapons to orphan children in the Congo. The code is gone. It's replaced by this pure mathematical abstraction, trying to find the smallest unit possible. Codes aren't very small. They're pervasive, massive meanings shared by a huge number of people and intensely complicated. They're things everyone understands as cosmological truths that you wouldn't even doubt, or at least as a despotic sign or edict of imminent death otherwise. Modern semiotics, the understanding of meaning and what things mean, comes from the study of these signs. But well, everyone else was studying how signs worked. My favorite, Hjelmslev, he's busy taking everything apart to their smallest pieces. Wouldn't be shocked to find out that he's mostly known for his mathematics. So Hjelmslev showed that every sign system doesn't just exist in how we see it, but instead it has both this expression plane and a content plane. How things expressed and the content that's actually within. But it's not just that. That comes from normal semiotics. The big deal is that each of these planes can be further divided into form and structure. So let's see if I can speed run some Hjelmslev. Think of it like this. You hear a word. There is the physical sound waves. This is the expression substance. Then there's the pattern that makes these sounds meaningful. Then there's the conceptual meaning, the content form that's in there. And then there's the actual thing being referenced, the content substance. So, as an example, I say, cat. You hear it phonetically. You recognize the phonological rules that make that sound recognizable to you. You grasp the conceptual meaning of a small furry feline pet. You may even glance at or conjure the image of a specific cat, and all of this is part of how that word operates now. Why am I bringing this up? How does this matter to capitalism? Well, it's because these layers can be separated. You can strip meaning down to a very pure abstract form, divorced from its expression and its content. And that's what capitalism does. It takes this formal structure of value and divorces it from any particular substance. Deleuze and Guattari seize on this insight. When they talk about capitalism's decoding, they're describing something Hjelmslev stumbled on. I say $100. The phonetic value is made in sound. The symbols that are used for value are there, that dollar sign, the abstract notion of what $100 gets you, and the reference thing I'm buying with it. But that third thing is the focus. Exchange worth itself, not the goods. It doesn't matter at all. I mean, that's literally how financial derivatives work, and they're basically making our economy. They're not traded on the actual thing. They're pure abstractions of exchange worth without any substance at all. Money is pure value relationship, stripped of all traditional meanings, stripped codes. Go look at anything that's happening in crypto. Think about how a traditional market values a cow. In most societies, a cow's value is really deeply coded. It mattered if the cow was inherited. Was it part of a dowry? Is it for a sacrifice? Is it for food? Each type of cow has its own rules, meanings, proper, improper uses. You can't just substitute cow for cow. They're not fungible with codes. But when capitalism arrives, fungibility happens. That cow becomes an asset, a pure quantity, a cow, but on a modern balance sheet as a number. It doesn't matter if it's a sacred cow or a dairy cow. What matters is its price, or the price you could get for it. The formal structure of value has been completely separated from the actual cow. Yomslev would say capitalism keeps the form of value while discarding its substance, just like how Glossomatics, his system, showed that language could be reduced to pure differential relationships. Cat is just what's different from bat or mat. Capitalism can do this. It reduces everything to these differential quantities. Take a $1,000 cow, which is actually really cheap these days, but think of it, because it's actually more like it's 100 $10 chickens, or 2 $500 TVs, or 5 hours of $200 an hour consulting work by some asshole in Silicon Valley. Ask a college kid who has just learned that he can sell some of the drugs he bought to pay for food or school books. Money, dollars, capital, that's what matters. The substance is irrelevant. It doesn't matter anymore. The traditional codes that said you can't compare things sacred to things that are profane is a real thing, or you can't exchange ritual objects for everyday goods. These dissolve into pure mathematical relationships. It's what makes capitalism so radically different from all the previous systems. The despot wants to overcode local meanings with their own meaning. Capitalism strips meaning away entirely, leaving only a skeletal structure of pure efficiency. This right here is where we find the capitalist axiomatic. We're going to pause on that word. It's a really important word if you're going to be talking about Deleuze and Guattari, but just in general to be able to discuss how capitalism works. They didn't choose this word randomly. See, in mathematical set theory, axioms are those base rules that you accept without proof to build an entire system. They do not need to represent a real thing. They just need to work consistently within its own set, its own system's logic. And in set theory, we can say, let us assume that this is an empty set. We build from there. Capitalism can say, let's assume everything can be valued, and we build the entire system from there. Axiomatic. Now, let's look back, though, to make this point at what Levi-Strauss and Godelier taught us about the coding of things socially. See, in prehistoric societies, our drives, they were coded through a material process that was built out of social realities. You should want to marry this type of person. It wasn't an edict like that. It was more of the codes gave you the drive towards these things. Then we had sacred societies, that of the despotic, the kings, the pharaohs, the despots. The king himself becomes involved in everything.
It's good to be the king.
Then capitalism shows up. What's marriage? Well, it's a contractual relationship. It's something that kind of works like if you wanted to start a really shitty LLC, that's kind of the structure you'd do for two people. They're not very good legal documents. Marriage is that, but that's all it is today. Young people know all too well the phrase, oh, we'll get married when the numbers work and we can afford it. That's not from code. That's all too civilized. That's crucial, though. In traditional systems, your drives, they kind of were rebuilt to follow social codes. You were born into them. But under capitalism, desire, desire, libido, becomes pure mathematical potential. You don't really desire things because they're coded as desirable. You desire whatever maximizes this abstract utility function value. Just saying it made me want to puke in my mouth a little bit. Christ. Think of modern dating apps. They don't tell you who you should desire based on kinship or social codes. And then I realized that Christian mingle's a thing. But still, even on those, all of these things turn desire into this weird, pure numbers game. See, your job when you're on them, you want to maximize matches. You want to optimize your response rates. You want to A/B test photos and descriptions and opening lines and discussions. Reddit's filled with these nightmares. You want to algorithmically rate your own potential partners and make sure that you talk to as many as you do based on what their value is. Your desires here are not being coded or overcoded. They're axiomatized into pure, efficient calculations. Just like how set theory builds complex mathematics from very simple axioms, capitalism builds complex systems of desire from simple calculations and understandings of value. And this is where capitalism reveals this bizarre dual nature. Because while it's busy turning everything into efficiency and pure numbers, it simultaneously needs all of those old power structures to keep functioning. Think how modern corporations operate. They use algorithmic efficiency and raw calculation to a fucking nightmarish point. They use these to destroy traditional mom and pop businesses and relationships, purely cynically. Simultaneously, though, those same companies, they reward loyalty and family-like workplaces. We are just like a family here. It's the most amazing thing. You won't even believe it. We all care about each other. Till HR decides otherwise. Deleuze and Guattari point out this contradiction that Marx really wrote about all too well. Capitalism has to destroy codes to enable this flux of money to be freed, labor, resources, all sorts of stuff. But it also needs to maintain certain archaic forms of power to keep things from spinning out of control. It's like having a foot slammed on the gas and the other one slammed on the brake. You can see this play out all the time these days. Banks turn money into pure mathematical flux, but they rely on the state's authority to guarantee the currency underneath it. Companies preach pure market efficiency, while depending on family structures to reproduce labor, or state power to make sure that they are enforceably paid so they can have money. We'll talk about that in a second. These awful nightmares of tech platforms, they reduce human interaction to data points in the algorithm, but they leverage traditional social pressures for that very engagement itself. And this is what D&G mean by the archaisms of capitalism. The market might run on pure axiomatics, but it needs this despotic overcoding of the state and the primitive coding of the family to function. That's why we still have all these weird things, this patriarchal family structure as the family is being destroyed. We have nationalist sentiment in a very globalized economy. We have religious morality in a very secular world. We have traditional hierarchies popping out of communist work groups. It's the most insane thing. These aren't the same codes that existed before. We fool ourselves into that. Those old codes, they were born emergently of experience. They were lived. They were built by the pressures of the time. Instead, what we have today, this simulacra of codes, they're the charcoal remnants of codes that burned in the fire of capitalism. They're lifeless, artificial recreations that cynically serve capital's needs. The modern nuclear family is not the same as a traditional kinship system. It's a grossly simplified, mass-produced version formed just to make sure that we reproduce labor power. And then we come to where America is now, and we're watching this live. Both sides of this contradiction collide and implode simultaneously. The axioms of capitalism are eating through the last social codes we had as a state and as a government and as a country, while the power structures meant to contain them are hardening into a pure force. The American family specifically knows this too well. That crucial unit, capitalism, demands replace labor and maintain social order. It's being axiomatized and efficientized to death. Housing costs make family formation mathematically not possible. Gig work destroys family time. Child rearing is a pure cost-benefit analysis. And even dating itself, as I said, is reduced to market efficiency. But simultaneously, power structures, they're abandoning any pretense of social codes. They're turning to this space of raw domination. We have a police force now that is pure force and has almost no legitimacy. Politicians have stopped pretending to serve the public good outright. Corporations are dropping the family pretense in lieu of naked exploitation. Education has become undisguised as job training. And this is what Marx and also D&G warned about. When capitalism's axioms finally eat through all the simulated codes that it needed to function, we don't get liberation. We get what they would call naked power structures. The mask of legitimate authority would just fall away. It would leave what Foucault called pure governmentality. Back to Amazon, think about that. They are purely an algorithmically efficient, naked system paired with naked power over workers. No pretense of company loyalty. They have a churn rate for employees the same way that Farmville or Monopoly Go on mobile games has a churn rate of people who pay them pennies a day. There's no social codes there about worker dignity or even having a pretense of such a thing. It's just raw calculation backed by force. People who work there are upfront about this. It's one of the reasons unions are actually being more successful there than ever. But this isn't an aberration. This is capitalism's endgame. The tragedy is that as these last social codes dissolve, we are not moving towards this pure mathematical fantasy efficiency. Sorry, Peter Thiel, I know you've been jerking off about it for about 20 years now, but we're not going to get there. Instead, we're trapped between algorithmically optimized exploitation and increasingly desperate attempts to enforce order through that pure power. As workers piss in bottles so they don't get fired, or hospitals in poor and rural areas close as Trump and Elon Musk decide they're not efficient. Airlines happily sell too many tickets on a flight. They have to be efficient. They got to, but it's not fraud, right? It's efficiency. If the flight's overbooked, they'll offer people to stay behind, and when no one does, they will make you. And if you talk back, enjoy being banned from the airline and being physically thrown off the plane. Don't defend that person. You'll be next. In America here, we have a company called Core Civic. They have a private prison system where prisoners work for pennies for major corporations. That's basically as close as we're probably going to get to perfect efficiency. I mean, only good old American slavery beats it dollar for dollar. Inmates who fuck up on this job, they commonly get retaliation of solitary confinement, denial of medical care, and losing those pennies per hour that were keeping them stocked on whatever the hell they could afford for pennies a fucking hour. Also, they're in prison, you know? On top of this, the single most powerful person in our government, maybe the world.
The chainsaw for bureaucracy.
He runs a department of efficiency. The axioms, the archaisms, they're all failing, leaving us with neither the stability of traditional codes nor the promised efficiency of this pure calculation. And this is America's current moment. Calculation and force, locked in a death spiral to figure out who might come out on top. None will. The horror of our situation is that we can't opt out of it. You can't leave capitalism behind. You can't overthrow it through pure resistance. D&G understood this well. Capitalism isn't just simply an economic system we adopted. It's a culmination of a historical process that has shaped how we think, desire, and understand ourselves. So when tech billionaires talk about disrupting government or crypto enthusiasts dream of escaping state control, they miss the point entirely. Even as they tear down bureaucratic structures, they reinforce the patterns of patriarchal power and social control, but they justify them now through market efficiency or technological inevitability. Elon Musk is the king of all this. Take a look at free speech on Twitter, the old code of old. It's not free speech. It's not freedom. It is replacing state and corporate codes with an artificial natural order that somehow always ends up reinforcing the existing power structure. I mean, he's actively banning people for reporting on stuff that at the same time he's claiming he's doing for the good of public and openly. Well, Ye was always the best part of Twitter before, still has my favorite tweet of all time. Watching him scream now that he's a Nazi over and over and over. This isn't making us more free. Cryptocurrency, again, another thing to keep coming back to as we do this, and you will see this return and return. It's meant to free us from the banks, but it just creates that same hierarchy and inequalities with new winners. I worked in crypto. I think the tech is fascinating. I think a lot of tech is incredible, but this tech is filled with poetic stories. Alexander Mashinsky. See, he built his token in business off screaming about how banks are criminals. Don't trust banks. He wore that shirt everywhere. Only to recently plead guilty to a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme to which nobody was shocked existed. And the Trump movement that allowed this to get to this point, this is it perfectly. As it attacks big government, it strengthens repressive aspects of social control, but it justifies them through common sense and traditional values or God's right. You will hear common sense brought out more and more and more over the next 3 years. It's all they have. The bureaucracy will weaken, but patriarchal power will grow. And that's really the thing that scares me. It's what makes our moment just difficult to resist and so dangerous. We're caught in an impossible bind. We can't go back to traditional social codes. That's gone forever. We can't survive this capitalist system. And we can't destroy the system from the outside. There is no outside. And to top it off, all of us are formed by the very structures and processes that we need to change. We're invested in them internally. The challenge isn't just to resist capitalism or the state. It's to understand how deeply these structures have shaped our very capacity to even consider resistance. Any real change has to grapple with how these systems form us, our desire, and our understanding of what is possible. This YouTube channel, our Discord group born of COVID, these readings of Anti-Oedipus I do, this is really the thing all of them are trying to point towards, this dangerous moment and a way to look at it in which we aren't simply reacting to a system that made us. Maybe we'll be able to see how it works. Because when you can see how something really works, when you can see how capital builds us all, it's a little different. And this all includes Trump and Musk and all of the children failures that they have, all of their shitty, awful, racist friends. There's this wonderful term in critical theory called the capitalist eunuch.
Did you say eunuch?
It's in Anti-Oedipus. I fucking love this line. Deleuze wields it on occasion, but it's not for the bourgeois. It's not for the worker, but instead for those very, very much at the top. Because those people, they are intertwined in that efficiency and power so deeply, their own desire and drives, they don't even start. They're one with the machine. And nothing points to this more than a chance encounter that we witnessed with a child in the Oval Office. Donald Trump, who has pretended to be this virile, powerful, strong man of choice and agency, sitting to the side of a camera, moping. The chair he is sitting in hailed as the literal seat of global power for my entire life. And he looks defeated. To his right, speaking wildly and frantically, yet somehow also saying nothing as he always does, is Elon Musk, the guy who screams everywhere about efficiency, 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 and who capital and power have coincided within. He's a man who has never made money off his ventures. He's not really a businessman. No. His money is made from the very thing he is at the nexus of. Remember? See, Tesla never made money from selling cars. It's not their business. They make money from other companies selling cars. Tesla did this really amazing thing. They backed a set of laws globally, I think throughout the EU, China, and in the US, specifically in some states, that forced car companies to eventually go electric and to have certain percentages of their fleets that were electric. But if you failed, you would have to buy carbon credits from a company that did do this, to reward companies that made that move, and to punish companies who didn't. Except there's not a lot of companies that did this. You want to know the one company who did? Because the world didn't make a shift to electric. And they're probably not anytime soon, to nobody's surprise. Every competitor's car company yielded profit to them because they made cars that didn't quite fit. And Tesla got that. They got that carbon credit for doing nothing. For doing nothing. Almost half of Tesla's net income has come from these credits. It's around $10 billion worth now. And here he is now, the man at the nexus where his profit came from this crossover, now standing at that crossover and deciding which programs the government has that give money to companies get to keep going. Trump isn't getting to make those calls. It's unexpected. We have Trump. I don't want to call him a capitalist eunuch. I know that face sitting on the side of the bed. You know, the unwilling cuckold to capital, as the world watches him accept his place, sitting on the bed and watching another man in his spot. I don't say this to pity him. I want you to see the lack of virility, the lack of power, and realize this is true of Musk as well. See, the very system they seem to lead, ostensibly, it's created these interactions where Trump happily knuckles under to Elon like a bitch. It's so brutal, he's not even going to be mad about it today, tomorrow, or anything. In a perverse twist, he fully knows he made this happen. He made everyone see this. He chose that, and he will claim this was the plan. Control through cuckoldry. This is not a new thing. The process I've described this entire video exempts nobody. Nobody. Even those who are in charge. So while these capitalist cuckolds are bound by their golden chains that make them that which capital favors, the rest of us actually retain something more precious. A broken and cracked world. I mean that. See, it's precisely when things fail, when mechanisms fail, when the supposed titans and masterminds of the world in control reveal themselves behind the curtain as a nobody, as mere functionaries, genuine creation becomes possible. History has shown us new worlds are not born through a world that works smoothly. They emerge from ruptures, moments where the existing order has proven itself to be inadequate. The dysfunction we witness in these supposed masters of the universe isn't just amusing. It is fucking amusing, but it's necessary. For only when systems break, when their promised efficiency turns to chaos, do we get a chance to sit back and think and try something truly new.